Moscow, December 25th, 1991, night. Snow is falling over the Kremlin. The temperature is below freezing. And on top of the Kremlin's Spassky Tower, the red flag with a hammer and sickle is being lowered for the final time. Slowly, in silence, no ceremony, no crowd. Just a handful of guards and camera operators. The flag comes down, and the Russian tricolor goes up. At the beginning of December 1991, Mikhail Gorbachev was still the president of a nuclear superpower. The Soviet Union controlled 30,000 nuclear warheads. It had the largest standing army on Earth. It occupied 1/6 of the planet's land surface. And 26 days later, on December 26th, that country no longer existed. Gone, dissolved, erased from the map, not by invasion, not by nuclear war, not by a single shot fired in anger. The Soviet Union collapsed because its economy died, because its currency became worthless, because its people stopped believing. And once the belief was gone, the entire structure came down. In 900 days. 900 days. That is all it took. From the fall of the Berlin Wall in November 1989 to the dissolution of the Soviet Union in December 1991. Less than 3 years. A superpower that had existed for 70 years, that had fought World War II, that had put the first human in space, that had terrified the West for decades, vanished in the time it takes to complete 2 academic semesters. By the end of this video, you will understand how the collapse happened so fast, why military power could not stop economic disintegration, and why this story is a warning for every empire that believes it is too big to fail. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the illusion, to the moment before the fall of the late 1980s. If you were looking at the Soviet Union from the outside, it still looked terrifying. Massive military parades in Red Square, intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarines, tanks, a global network of allies and satellite states, the imagery of power, the projection of strength, the appearance of permanence. But inside, the system was rotting. And the rot had been spreading for decades. The Soviet economy was built on central planning. The government decided what to produce, how much to produce, and who would receive it. And for a while in the 1950s and 1960s, this worked. The Soviet Union industrialized rapidly. It built cities. It educated its population. It achieved technological milestones. But by the 1970s, the system had stopped working. And by the 1980s, it was in freefall. Why? Because central planning cannot process information. A market economy uses prices to signal supply and demand. If there's too much of something, the price drops. If there's not enough, the price rises. This feedback loop allows resources to be allocated efficiently, but in a command economy, there are no prices. There is no feedback. Bureaucrats in Moscow decide how many shoes to make, how much steel to produce, how many tractors to build, and they're always wrong, because they do not have the information. They are guessing. And the result is chronic shortage and chronic waste. Factories produce goods nobody wants because the plan says to produce them. Goods that people actually need are not produced because the plan did not account for them. Shops have shelves full of items that never sell, and empty shelves for the items people are desperate to buy. By the mid-1980s, the Soviet Union was importing grain. A country with some of the most fertile land on Earth could not feed its own people. Why? Because collective farming was so inefficient that it destroyed agricultural productivity. Farmers had no incentive to work hard. The state took the harvest. So the harvest was small, and the people starved. But the real crisis was energy. The Soviet economy was propped up by oil. High oil prices in the 1970s brought in massive revenue. The government used that money to subsidize everything: food, housing, transportation, the military. When oil prices collapsed in the 1980s, the revenue dried up, and the subsidies could not be maintained. The entire structure began to crumble. But here's the critical part. Despite all of this, the Soviet leadership believed they could survive. They believed they were too big to fail, too powerful to collapse. They had nuclear weapons. They had an army. They controlled Eastern Europe. Surely, they thought, economic problems could be managed. Surely the system would endure. This is denial, and it is the first stage of every collapse. Then came the moment that broke the illusion. November 9th, 1989. The Berlin Wall falls. East Germans flood into West Berlin. The barrier that had divided Europe for 28 years is torn down, not by governments, by ordinary people with hammers and bare hands. And the Soviet Union does nothing. It does not send tanks. It does not intervene. It lets it happen. Because Gorbachev has decided that the cost of maintaining the empire is too high, that the satellites in Eastern Europe are draining resources, that reform is necessary. But what Gorbachev does not understand is that the wall is not just a physical barrier. It is a symbol of Soviet power, a symbol of the inevitability of communist control. And when it falls, the entire narrative collapses with it. Within weeks, Poland holds free elections. Solidarity, the anti-communist movement, wins. The communist government falls. Then Hungary opens its borders. Then Czechoslovakia has the Velvet Revolution. Then Romania executes its dictator on Christmas Day. One by one, every Soviet satellite in Eastern Europe breaks free. And the Soviet Union, which had controlled these countries for 40 years, watches it happen. Powerless. This is the credibility break, the moment when people stop believing in the system's permanence, the moment when fear turns into defiance. And once that belief is gone, no amount of military power can bring it back, because power is not just about guns and tanks. Power is about perception, about the belief that the system will endure, that resistance is futile, that the empire is eternal. And when that belief shatters, the empire shatters with it. By 1990, the Soviet Union is hemorrhaging. The Baltic states declare independence. Ukraine begins moving toward sovereignty. The central government in Moscow is losing control, and Gorbachev, trying to hold the Union together, introduces reforms. Glasnost, perestroika, openness, restructuring. But the reforms accelerate the collapse. Because once you give people a taste of freedom, they want more. Once you admit the system is broken, they demand change. And once you open the door to criticism, you cannot close it again. In August 1991, hardliners in the Communist Party attempt a coup. They want to reverse the reforms, to restore Soviet power, to crack down on the independence movements. They send tanks into Moscow. They place Gorbachev under house arrest. They declare a state of emergency. And it fails, spectacularly, not because they lack military force, but because the soldiers refuse to fire on their own people. Russian President Boris Yeltsin stands on a tank and defies the coup leaders. And the soldiers stand down. The coup collapses within 3 days. This is the moment the Soviet Union truly dies. Because the final pillar of any authoritarian regime is the willingness of the military and police to use violence. And when that pillar breaks, when the enforcers refuse to enforce, the system has nothing left. But the collapse is not just political, it is economic. This is where ordinary people feel the pain. Because when a currency dies, when an economy disintegrates, daily life becomes a nightmare. By late 1991, the ruble is in freefall, inflation is spiraling, prices are doubling every few weeks. Workers are paid in rubles that are worth less every day. By the time they receive their salary and get to the store, the prices have already risen. Their money is evaporating in their hands, and the stores are empty. Not because there is no food, but because producers do not want to sell for rubles. Why would you sell bread for money that will be worthless tomorrow? So goods disappear from the shelves. The official economy shuts down, and a barter economy emerges. Vodka becomes currency. Cigarettes become currency. People trade goods directly. A doctor trades medical services for food. An engineer sells personal belongings on the street to buy bread. Teachers, scientists, professionals, all of them are reduced to survival mode, and crime explodes. Because when the police are not being paid, they stop enforcing the law. When the state cannot provide security, people take security into their own hands. Organized crime fills the vacuum. The mafia becomes more powerful than the government, and the rule of law evaporates. This is what happens when a system collapses. It is not abstract. It is visceral. It is people standing in line for hours to buy a loaf of bread. It is savings becoming worthless overnight. It is the disintegration of social order. And it happens fast, faster than anyone expects. On December 8th, 1991, the leaders of Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus meet in secret. They sign an agreement dissolving the Soviet Union. Just like that. No referendum, no public vote. 3 men in a room decide that the country is over. On December 25th, Gorbachev resigns. He has no choice. The country he presides over no longer exists. The republics have declared independence. The central government has no authority. And on December 26th, the Soviet Union is formally dissolved. 70 years. Gone. In 900 days. Now let me connect this to the present. Because the Soviet collapse is not ancient history. It is a template, a warning. And the same patterns are visible today. The United States looks at the Soviet Union and says, that could never happen to us. We are too strong, too wealthy, too advanced. We have the largest military, the global reserve currency, nuclear weapons. Surely we are too big to fail. But the Soviets said the same thing, and they were wrong. Look at the parallels. The Soviet Union overspent on its military. So does the United States. The Soviet economy was propped up by energy exports. The U.S. economy is propped up by dollar dominance. The Soviets printed money to cover deficits. The U.S. prints money through quantitative easing. The Soviets believed their system was permanent. The U.S. believes the dollar will always be the global reserve currency. And just like the Soviets, the U.S. is in denial. The debt is unsustainable. The trade deficit is massive. Manufacturing has been outsourced. Infrastructure is crumbling, but the belief persists. We are too big, too powerful, too essential. We cannot collapse. But collapse does not happen slowly. It happens suddenly. After a long period of gradual decline, there is a moment when everything breaks, when confidence shatters, when the illusion of permanence is revealed to be just that, an illusion. The Soviet Union looked strong in 1989. It had nuclear weapons, it had an army, it had control over half of Europe. And then, in 900 days, it was gone. Not because it was invaded, not because it lost a war, but because the economic foundation crumbled. And once the foundation was gone, the structure could not stand. Collapse is nonlinear. It does not move in a straight line. For years, nothing happens. The system decays slowly. And then, all at once, it falls apart. The Soviet Union declined for decades, but the final collapse took less than 3 years. And when it comes, there's no time to prepare. By the time people realize the system is finished, it is too late. The currency is worthless, the shelves are empty, the government has lost control, and the only option is survival. This is the lesson of the Soviet collapse. Empires do not last forever. Military power cannot compensate for economic weakness, and belief, once broken, cannot be restored. The Soviet Union thought it was invincible. It thought it was too big to fail, and in 900 days it learned otherwise. The question is whether the current global powers will learn the same lesson, and whether they will see the collapse coming, or whether, like the Soviets, they will be blindsided by how fast the end arrives. Here's what I want you to do. Go to the comments right now. Do you think the United States, the European Union, or other major powers could collapse as suddenly as the Soviet Union did? Or do you think they are too big, too diversified, too stable to fail? Write one word. Collapse or stable. Let me know what you think. And if this video made you see the fragility of superpowers differently, share it with someone who still believes empires last forever.